She had a tremble about her, the kind of tremble that you feel when you place a hand on someone's shoulder. I ran into her, of all places, in the grocery store. I asked her how she was doing, how her kids were, about her husband. And that's when her eyes began to fill with tears, her chin began to quiver, and that's when the story spilled out. He had left her, traded her in on a newer model. She didn't think she was going to make it. And so the produce section became a sanctuary of sorts, and I prayed for her. And I placed my hand on her shoulder and I said, you're going to get through this. It won't be painless, won't be quick. But God is going to use this mess for something really, really good. In the meantime, don't be foolish and don't be naive. But don't despair either, because with God's help, you're going to get through this. Just a couple of days later, I got a call from a friend, equally despondent, been laid off at work. It was his fault. Made some tacky remarks, inappropriate remarks. His manager had no other choice but to let him go, and now he's a middle-aged accountant in a depressed economy, and his family's upset, and he's upset with himself, and he needed some assurance, and so I gave it. I said, you'll get through this. Won't be painless, won't be quick, but God will use this mess for something good. In the meantime, don't be foolish or naive, but don't despair either, because with God's help, you'll get through this. And then there's the girl I ran into recently in a cafe. She was serving coffee, and we got into a conversation, and her story was pretty painful as well, even for a teenager. Only 16 years of age, her parents are divorcing. And when they brought her the news of the divorce, they brought her the news that she needs to choose. Live with mom, live with dad. Can't imagine the burden that must be on a kid. I said, you'll get through this. Won't be painless, won't be quick. But God will use this mess for something good. In the meantime, don't be foolish and don't be naive, but don't despair either. Because with God's help, you'll get through this. Where do we get such a promise? Where do we find such hope? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's what we're going to talk about. Well, life comes with challenges. If you've got a pulse, then you've got a few problems. It's just part of life. We're either coming out of a crisis, in the middle of a crisis, or headed toward a crisis. But we don't have to face these challenges alone. Over these next 6 sessions, I want to assure you that you're going to get through this. You're not facing this without help. And God is going to use this challenge to do something even greater than you can imagine. We've got a survivor's creed that we're going to say out loud together. And I'm inviting you wherever you are to fill your lungs with air and your hearts with hope. Let's say this like we mean it, shall we? It reads like this. I'll get through this. It won't be painless. It won't be quick. But God will use this mess for good. In the meantime, don't be foolish or naive, but don't despair either. With God's help, I will get through this. What audacity! How dare we make such a claim? Where do we come up with this thought? Well, actually, I came across this in a pit. A pit, a steep, dark pit, so steep and so deep that the boy could not get out. And had he been able to climb out, his brothers would have pushed him back in anyway. It was their idea that he was in the pit. The story is in Genesis chapter 37. And with these words, we are introduced to the calamity of Joseph, verses 23 and 25. And so it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. And they took him and they cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. So it was an abandoned cistern. We can imagine it with the roots growing out of the side and the jaggedy rocks, maybe even at the bottom. And were we able to peer over into the bottom of the pit, there we would see the boy. At least he appears to be a boy. He's only 17 years old. He's got a downy beard. He's got spindly legs and arms. His hands are bound. His ankles are tied. He's on his side. There's spit in the sand where he's drooled. His voice is hoarse from shouting and screaming, but no one's listening to him. It's not that the brothers couldn't hear him. It's just that they chose not to hear him. Some 2 decades later, they will give this confession. We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. We would not hear. Who are these brothers? Well, they're the great-grandsons of Abraham. They're the sons of Jacob. They are the ones after whom the tribes are going to be named. In fact, in the book of Revelation, we are told that their names are engraved in the foundation of the city gates to the New Jerusalem. So this is as close as the Bible gets to royalty. These are the Kennedys of their day. This is a famous family. But this day, this is a family in crisis. This is the ultimate, this is the Bronze Age version of a dysfunctional family. They could have their own reality TV show, for crying out loud. They hate their brother. They hate their brother so much that they're throwing him in a pit, and then they're saying, okay, let's just go eat lunch. Just go eat lunch. While he's screaming, they're passing the French fries. They're just eating lunch, oblivious, hard-hearted, oafish, resistant, insensitive. Here's why. Their father Jacob pampered Joseph like Joseph was a prized calf. He was the son of Rachel. Now Jacob had 2 wives, but he really just had one love. And when Rachel, his love, died, he kept the memory of Rachel alive by fawning over Joseph, their son. He was the first of 2 sons that they would have. And so he just pretended that Joseph was his favorite. He didn't pretend it. He made Joseph his favorite son. It's a classic case of the problems of favoritism. And what he gave to Joseph, he didn't give to the other brothers. Joseph stayed home. They went out and worked. Joseph got his own room. They had to share a dormitory. Joseph got his own car. They had to ride a bicycle. Joseph got a tunic of many colors. They got hand-me-down clothes. It was favoritism. And consequently, the brothers hated Joseph. I mean, they didn't just dislike him. But several times in the first chapter, we read they hated him, they hated him, they hated him. They could not speak peaceably about him. So finally, when they caught Joseph 60 miles away from Daddy's protection, they just decided to put an end to him once and for all, and they dumped him over the edge of the pit. They stripped the tunic off of him, and they threw him over the edge of the pit. These are defiant verbs. In fact, we get the impression that they were happy for the boy to die, except for the fact that they saw an opportunity to make some money. And since their desire for money was just a little stronger than their desire for blood, they saw a chance to sell him, and they sold him into slavery. Now, Joseph didn't see this assault coming. He didn't wake up that morning and think, I better put on my padded clothing because this is the day I get dumped in a pit. This attack caught him off guard, and so did yours. It always does. It catches us off guard. Now, Joseph's attack came in the form of a cistern. Yours came in the form of a diagnosis or a traumatic injury or a foster home. Joseph was thrown into the pit and abandoned. Maybe you were, thrown into the unemployment line and forgotten. Thrown into divorce court and betrayed, or even thrown into a bed and abused. Joseph is not the first and he's not the last to have a story that begins in a pit. And maybe that's where you are. Maybe if you were to describe your situation right now, you would say, I'm just at the bottom of a hole. And as you look, you don't see any easy exit. You think the walls are steep. You don't know how you'll get out. I'm sure Joseph felt the same. You see, Joseph's story got worse before it got better. The abandonment led to enslavement, entrapment, and imprisonment. He was sucker punched. He was sold out. He was mistreated. Time and time again, people made promises to him that they didn't keep. They offered gifts only to take them back. If hurt were a swampland, Joseph was sentenced to life in the Everglades. Yet Joseph never gave up. He never gave up. There are many people who have challenges come into their lives, many people in the Bible who face challenges. And yet the story of Joseph stands out because here's a guy who never got bitter. He never let his anger metastasize into hatred. He never let his heart get hard. There was something about Joseph's story that enabled him not just to survive, but also to thrive. You've noticed this, that every stage of his life, Joseph was promoted to the top of the class. Yeah, he's sold into slavery, but then he's put over Potiphar's household. Yeah, he's thrown into the prison, but next thing we know, he's in charge of the prison. Yeah, he's taken in front of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, hey, you're going to be my prime minister. And by the end of his life, Joseph, this boy in the pit, is the prince in the palace, and he's over the distribution of food in one of the most difficult times in human history. It's not hyperbole to state that Joseph saved his generation from starvation. How would you like that on your resume? Joseph, Prince of Egypt, graduate of the University of Hard Knocks, saved the world. Pretty impressive for a kid whose story that begins down in the pit. So how did he do this? How did he do this? Well, we don't have to speculate. He gave us the answer. Many years later, when the roles have been reversed, and the brothers are the ones in trouble, and Joseph is the one in charge. The brothers come to Joseph pleading for mercy because they're afraid that they are going to end up in a pit of Joseph's making. But Joseph tells them this. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Now, that word meant, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. This is a word that comes out of the Hebrew language that means to weave something. If you were to weave a tapestry, you might use this verb. Joseph says, okay, you came weaving evil, taking the threads of evil and weaving them together. But God took those same threads and rewove it into a tapestry of something good. You brought evil into my life, but God rewove it into something good. Satan is the source of this evil, and his logic is simple. If he can destroy the family of Abraham, well, he can destroy the lineage of Jesus Christ. And so he comes in weaving evil. He wants to destroy the family of Abraham, the sons of Jacob. But God takes the very actions of evil, reweaves them in such a fashion that He promotes one of the sons of Jacob to be prime minister, so that the family is not destroyed. Just the opposite. They are placed in a protective place in Egypt with their brother on the throne. Who would have thought? What you intended as evil, Joseph said, God used for good to protect all of these people. You know the reason I think that Joseph's story is in the Bible? I think the reason that Joseph's story is in the Bible is to teach us that God can trump any evil in the world. There's nothing in the story of Joseph that would say there's no evil in the world. Evil is on every page. It's on every page, and there's evil on every corner of the world today. But every page of the story of Joseph, even every paragraph, every sentence in the story of Joseph tells us that God can take this evil that has come into your world and mine, and He can use it. He can reroute it. He can reweave it. He can repurpose it. He can recycle it. He can redeem it into something good. You're going to get through this. You are. You're going to get through this. We fear we won't. That's one of the challenges of tough times. We fear that the depression will never lift. We fear that the screaming will never stop. We fear that we'll never understand the pain. We fear we won't get through it. But you need to know, and I need to know, that through is one of God's favorite words. He gets us through the Red Sea. He gets us through the fiery furnace. He gets us through the storm. He gets us through even crucifixions. God can take that which appears to be evil, and He can get His people through. Deliverance is to the Bible what the Mardi Gras is to New Orleans. It's big, it's brassy, it's everywhere. God loves to get His people through things. Will it be painless? Have you wept your last tear? Have you gone through your last chemotherapy? Does God guarantee you'll never go to a cemetery or you'll never have a sleepless night? No. But He does guarantee that He'll be with you and that He'll use that pain for something good. Will it be quick? I hope so. I hope so. I hope that next time you say a prayer, all your problems disappear, but experience has taught us otherwise, right? Sometimes it takes time. In fact, sometimes God takes His time. It seems we're always in a hurry. He took 120 years to get Noah ready for the flood, 40 years to get Moses ready for his assignment. He called a shepherd boy, David, to be king, but then He sent the shepherd boy back out to take care of the sheep for a few years. He called Saul to become an apostle, Paul, but before Saul became Paul, Saul had to go to Arabia for some special training. Sometimes God just takes His time, but He doesn't waste this time. He doesn't waste this time. And so this time in which you're waiting, God is using. God always uses time. He's never in a hurry. He's always on time. We're in a hurry and often late or early, but God is always on time. So if God is taking His time, that's okay. That's okay. God will use this mess. This mess. It feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, it feels like a perfect mess. We look at Joseph in the pit and we say, oh boy, what a perfect mess. But God looks at this and says, oh boy, what a perfect chance. Perfect chance to train and develop the future prime minister of Egypt. I don't know what all Joseph needed to learn, but God knew exactly what Joseph needed to learn. And part of that training came in the pit, part of it came in the house of Potiphar, part of that training came in the prison. But all of that was working together to create the kind of person that God was going to use to accomplish His will. Believe me, dear friend, God is working right now in this mess. He's working right now in this chaos, in this confusion. He's teaching you something that He wants you and I to know. He's training us for exactly what? I can't say, but God can. And He has you enrolled right now in a course that maybe you didn't volunteer for. It's assigned curriculum, right? He has assigned you this curriculum because He wants you to develop a characteristic or a skill that He can then use to further His kingdom. So you'll get through this. It feels like a mess, but He will use this mess for something good. So in the meantime, don't be foolish or naive. You're a sitting duck for stupid decisions right now, so you got to be careful. You got to stay faithful. You got to stay prayerful. But you got to keep believing. Hang on to hope. Hang on to hope. You got a parachute handed to you. God's presence. Put it on. Hang on to it. He's with you in this. God will use these tough times for something good. I want to be very clear. You are a Joseph in your generation. You carry something of God within you. Something holy, something good, something positive, something encouraging. And Satan would love to neutralize you. But the story of Joseph is in the Bible to teach us that God trumps evil. And He rescued Joseph, and He's going to rescue you as well. Just be patient and just trust Him. Joseph would be the first to tell you that life in the pit stinks. But if there's one good thing about life in the pit, it's this: there's only one way to look. Look up. Look up. And the same God who reached in to help Joseph is the God who's going to reach in and help you.